Welcome, welcome, welcome to the legendary half-yearly astro forecasts with the one and only Austin Coppock. Mr. Coppock, how are you? How are things?
Things are good. I am good-ish. We just obtained three new peacocks to match the wall, which is exciting. We didn't really obtain them so much as
Stole them?
somebody was like, "Hey, do you want some peacocks?" So you know,
There is only one correct answer to that. Yes, I did not know that
yeah.
that's in
Unless
fact
you're
what I want.
physically incapable of housing peacocks, you just say yes.
Yeah, well done. Well, I've seen some photos of the new arrivals, and I am incandescent with jealousy. They are a surprisingly difficult thing to source in Tasmania. I once saw one sad-looking solo peacock on, it's called Gumtree down here, but it's like Craigslist. It's the same free listing platform. And it was in the northwest of the state, and I'm in the southeast. And it's like, this is too much work for one depressed bird. So good luck to that bird, but my time with peacocks has not yet arrived. And so yes, very jealous. They look like fine specimens from what I've seen from the pictures.
I believe they were quite loved and well taken care of. They were just apparently causing too much ruckus on the farm.
I see, I see.
So far
Well,
they're getting along beautifully with the turkeys in the yard. They both just do ground bird stuff together. I thought there
see,
might be a war, but
yeah. Hey, we'll end up talking about that. Maybe they're waiting for the right astro time. But I'm looking in the chat. There are people with peacock experience, people in peacock club saying they're noisy, which is another thing I do know about them, but that's kind of all right for you guys where you are. But yeah, I also hear tell that they're surprisingly good pets for birds in the sense that if you're outside, probably just because they want food, but they're curious and they'll follow you around and so on. So I think a fine addition to the compound.
indeed, indeed.
Nice one. All right. Well, thanks everyone who is live with us on the call, and of course, people who are listening on the replay. We're going to do what we usually do. We're going to chat through what's just gone on, what our forecast is for this rest of the year, and the longer cycle thing. And if you are on the call, you get to participate in the Q&A, which, as I joked on the blog when I mentioned this, there really is only one rule, which is that if you have a personal chart question, I will answer it. And all my chart questions mandatorily include that stupid NASA additional zodiacal sign. So there's just an extra layer of dumb. I'm just going to make it up. And yeah, so that's my way or our way of saying there aren't any personal chart rules because it's too nitty gritty. But other than that, I think we should have at it. And in this new AI era, if any of you have seen my live streams, you will be aware, I like to put a slide or two together to keep us on track. So I say, we jump on in. Oh, let me share my screen. There we go. Fires of Transformation. We have some context for this title, which we will come on to as we move forward. But we've kind of done the first bit. How are your 6 months? Anything else? Anything else other than peacocks happened in the last 6 months, which seem to have gone rather quickly?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, they seem like I don't know, part of that is maybe just being old now, but a lot, I don't know, a lot has happened, a lot of planetary vibe shifts for lack of a better term. We had Saturn go into Pisces, we had Pluto give us like a 2 month or a 6 week preview of what Pluto and Aquarius would be like. We had, I mean, shit, the last time we talked, Mars hadn't even stationed direct yet.
Yeah.
And let's see, let's see, I guess how much to go over things. I'll just say the Mars stationing direct was really interesting because it was Mars direct on the star Aldebaran. And Aldebaran has to do with power through copious quantities of substance. It's like heavy and real. With in the in Agrippa, it says this star will help you make your fields productive and get all the metals and gems out of your mind. It's about stuff power, and it was really interesting because when it's stationed direct, it's when both NATO and Ukrainian forces, as well as Russian forces, were just shipping massive amounts of stuff and bodies to the front. And what was interesting about how that played out, I'd use the metaphor of a retrograde planet being drawn back like a bow and then moving forward. But unlike an arrow, a planet, once it changes direction, doesn't move very quickly. Doesn't have the the acceleration of an arrow. And so, but you did have a slow acceleration of hostilities, but it ended up just being the most intense period of grinding attritional warfare. And so the lines moved really slowly, even though there was a tremendous amount of substance and ferocity pushing from both sides, right? It's like if you had two similarly strong people like pushing on each other, it wouldn't seem like there was a tremendous amount of force because you wouldn't see either one move very much, right? But you wouldn't see you'd have to look at the eyes and the quivering muscles in this strain. So I thought it was an interesting, it was interesting to see. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I've been sitting with that as well, right? Because at Armstrong's conference in November of last year, the biggest turning point for the year was January, followed by April, May, which we'll talk about, and then this mess that's coming up in July. And last year, that model got the beginning of the special operation to the week, and that wasn't as evident in the astrology. But this year, I think the astrology describes it better because the step change in January, because I remember us talking about it on that episode when I said the biggest turning point of the year is January, and he's like, "There's actually," you said, "there's not really that much going on other than a Mars direct station." And that, I think, described to a T what happened. And for me, it's interesting you talk about that stuff. What I noticed, what was alive for me in the stationing direct was the German foreign minister admitting that Germany's at war with Russia, and also the awareness on the global stage that the pipeline explosion was the US. Both of those things are like a fundamental elevation of war, but not in the visible sense like you were talking about. It's a big fucking deal. Like both of those things are going to have consequences later. Do you know what I mean? It is that, oh shit, we're back in the war business, and we've said some things that are going to spread from there. So I think January is definitely a win for astrology. Like that's a bigger shift. Well, so much of the second half of last year, that endless Mars action, it was always going to have, how to say this right, like a big import. This was going to be a particular station, I think. And for me, it was those moments of, escalation. It's not non-physical escalation so much, but slow and significant step change, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, just like literally, hundreds of thousands of tons of vehicles slowly, being shipped to staging locations and then to the front.
Yeah.
Right, like it's not as dramatic. Like seeing things loaded onto a train is not as dramatic as watching, artillery pieces fire. But it's that movement is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that that was interesting, and I'm glad we're talking about that. What was as you say, kind of a busy 6 months space weather-wise, but not least significant. But I'm glad we're talking about on a list of 6 months where a bunch of arguably more significant things happened. I'm glad we're talking about the Mars direct station, right? Because with the 6 months hindsight, in retrospect, it looks like, oh, I get what that was about. I get what that was about. This increase, not necessarily rapid increasing of war energy, I suppose.
Speaking of stations, the recent drama with the Titanic exploration sub, that happened during Saturn's very first station in Pisces, right? So, and sort of everybody in astrology land is like, oh, it's perfect. It's like the most astrology perfect description of of Saturn and Pisces making a statement, right? Saturn is that which is like deep, dark, heavy, forbidding, slow, old, dead, terrifying, right? Like the corpse of a ship, the corpse of a tragic ship, and then going 2 miles beneath the earth, or excuse me, two miles beneath the surface of the ocean to explore this, and then being crushed or imploded by the mere by the mere weight of the ocean itself. It was just like, oh,
Yeah.
that's Saturn and Pisces.
If you were trying to be literal about it, like teaching what what could that be? That crushing of ocean couldn't be. It's amazing. And I don't know. Yeah. Is there
Yeah,
something? Is a weird question, right? Like, same thing with the Mars Direct Station. Is it just my imagination, or are some of these transits and space weather changes more literal these days? Like, is something happening to reality where this stuff is like, God, that's almost on the fucking nose. Like, you wouldn't even want to use that as an example if you were writing an astro textbook, because it's like, no, that's too on the nose. That will never happen. Billionaires will never be crushed by the ocean. Like, you know what I mean? It seems like, what the fuck? How, are we just getting more
no,
literal
I don't think it's new. If you
All
look
right.
back at history and then you find these moments where you have a planetary station or there's a configuration, it's often shockingly literal.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I did a talk at the NORWAC conference a month ago about the charts of the Menendez brothers. I didn't know that Netflix was making a new thing when I proposed that topic. I don't know, 10 months ago. But anyway, when you look at like when they're apprehended and then when they're sentenced, there's like a perfect Mars Saturn conjunction in both cases. A perfect Mars Saturn conjunction is like, maybe a week out of every 2 years, but it has to do with like punishment, imprisonment, severity of wrath, etc. It's like, oh, of course that was a Mars Saturn. But you see that stuff all the time. You might just be noticing more because you haven't devoted your adult life to being obsessed with just astrology.
Yeah. Not yet.
No, not yet.
Not
I
yet.
will say, the way that I decided to announce Saturn's movement into Pisces was I shared the video, a clip of the Lighthouse, the recent movie,
Sure.
where God, what's his name? A legendary actor who plays the old man in the lighthouse basically delivers the sea curse to the character played by Robert Pattinson, where basically to be destroyed, not just merely destroyed by the powers of the sea, but to be reduced to nothing, to lose identity, to lose all being, and to merely become the sea. I was like, when I saw this sub thing, I was like, oh, the sea curse got him. Willem
Yeah. Okay.
Dafoe's Sea Curse.
Willem
That is
Dafoe.
one of the best scenes ever put to film. So if anybody, just look up YouTube, look up Sea Curse, The Lighthouse, and you'll see what Saturn's up to now.
That was a good film. That's also true. And yeah, that was really cool. So, returning, I suppose, to the previous 6 months, the only thing I have from the either Mayan or economic cycle models to talk about other than January is April, May. So is there anything else that we need to look at and summarize between January and the April, May stuff, which again, I found quite a bit of alignment there because we had the eclipse stuff and whatever, but I'll talk about that bit when we get to it. Is there anything else we want to talk about in between January and April, May?
I don't think so. I'm sorry. I just got a notification that the weird Darth Vader thing is happening for the people who are listening with like, I sound like I'm doing the whole like dying thing,
Really? Because you
which
sound
I don't hear and you don't hear.
no, maybe it's there. Um, maybe we can blame them for it. But in the chat, anyone, does Austin sound like? Does Austin sound? Well, I don't want to say normal. That's not the right word. Does Austin sound like Austin?
Yeah,
Uh,
okay, so test words. Do I sound, because we had this terrible thing where it sounded like I was on an iron lung last time, which I didn't
yeah,
hear,
yeah,
but
yeah,
was very distracting for the audience. I
yeah.
sound
Yes,
fine.
there we go. Everyone
Okay,
else
great.
sounding good. Awesome. Okay, so if you're hearing Austin sounding weird, you're audio is wrong, or you might be having a medical episode. Either way, good luck. Good luck with solving that. Cool. Let's jump back in
Okay,
because
yeah. Apologies for the
for
interruption.
everyone who's listening. We are consummate professionals, and we got here half an hour beforehand to do sound checks and speed checks. And in fact, this time
Someone says I
arrows
sound
were
bitter. I don't know if I could do anything about that.
yeah, this time all the arrows were on my side. Like we were down to the wire trying to get ours to work. So, but this is what we do for you people. We did half an hour, and on my birthday, no less. Here I am. Not that
I was just gonna, yeah, I
more.
was just trying, I was just planning like a happy birthday, but then I was like, I was converting between Tasmanian time and here time, and I was like, is it tomorrow or is it yesterday or is it,
Yeah.
etc. But happy birthday, Gordon.
Why, thank you. Thank
You're
you very
33 now, right?
much. 33 next year, but almost. Yeah, and you seem fairly sober. As a matter of fact, Maribeth, this is my year of booze. It's completing my podcaster quartet, I suppose, because I have cold plunges and an infrared sauna, and I do Wim Hof breathing. And the only thing left to make you a broadcaster is to take a year off booze and then podcast about it, which I will do in January. So when Austin actually first elected this time, because naturally I don't elect them, but he did. He's like, oh, midday, Sunday the 25th for you. And I'm like, oh, that's my birthday. My first thought was like, oh God, I'll be hungover. Wait a minute, no, I won't. I could do a math test. So that's why we're here on my birthday. Fun fact. But that's enough about me. Let's go back to the hot mess we lived through. Cool. So I want to talk about the April-May stuff from a Socrates forecast perspective because it's very interesting. And what I hit on this morning to describe it to people who are unfamiliar with is it's kind of like when he talks about turning points, it's kind of like in the case of Russia, a Uranus return, and in the case of Ukraine, a Saturn return, happening at the same time, because it's an anniversary of significant events in those countries' lives that accord to the model. And in the case of Russia, it was a surprise bitch disruption. And in the case of Ukraine, it was honestly a foundational moment because they're very much the same thing, because it was Ukraine was the first country that pulled out of the Soviet Union that began the process of ending the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. So April, May was all of these anniversaries of significant events in the stories of Russia and Ukraine and Putin.
Well, and so let me jump in with that. So what happened just before April, May, which happened in March, but sort of set the stage, was the Saturn's ingress into Sea Curse. But yep. What that Saturn in Pisces, but more importantly, Saturn now in the same sign as Neptune, is such an important thing for Russian history. I believe we talked about it last time. I do a lot of talking, and I don't necessarily remember where I said what, but I'm pretty sure we talked about it. Saturn with Neptune represents a huge, at the very least, a significant regime pivot for Russia. And often regime change. The last one was the fall of the Soviet Union. The one before that was the death of Stalin and then de-Stalinization. The one before that was the Russian Revolution. The one before that was the assassination of was it Tsar Alexander II. It's so Saturn Neptune is just like these years are always huge for Russia. There's always either a reversal of positions and directions that went for decades previous, or there's, we actually have regime change in 2 of those 4 examples.
Yeah. And so for me, as far as I could tell, the event that was both of those things, and this is relevant to what's happened over the last 24 hours, was Bakhmut, because Bakhmut was the, I think, ultimate end of what's been there's kind of been 2 wars going on the last year and a half. There's been the actual war, and then there's been the entirely fake one on NATO-supported Twitter accounts and the rest of it, where there's plucky freedom-fighting airplanes doing all this stuff that, none of it happened, right? And Bakhmut was, I think, a thudding realization on the global stage that despite the amount of money being poured into it and so on, this doesn't end in the happy clappy Azov battalion victory, right? And so that's a fundamental step change on one side, but as it has turned out in the last 24 hours, it's a fundamental step change on the other side as well. So that's very interesting to me.
I mean, one of the things that became, so there was a question at the very end of the last live session that we did, and the question, I didn't give it much of an answer, but the question was, what happens when Mars goes into Cancer, which happened at the end of March, and Mars is in Cancer for all of April and part of May. And so Mars in Cancer is basically the place where a planet, it's the place where Mars is in its fall. A planet in its fall gets stuck. Like think literal, the fall's in like literal downward vertical action, like getting stuck in a pit. I've fallen, I can't get up, or this is like a trap for me, or like, oh, this is such a difficult position to work from, as far as that planet's actions are concerned. And what I said when the person asked, like, oh, what about when Mars goes into Cancer? I was like, well, the military operations, it'll be like high cost and ineffective, right? That's generally what you get with Mars in Cancer. Is it's twice as much effort to get half as much victory, and there's a lot of like collateral damage. And so it was really interesting that we saw the fiercest contention in Bakhmut during that Mars in Cancer period, where I don't think I believe anybody's casualty statistics at this point, like maybe a 5-year retrospective from a neutral body. But what seemed clear was that it was an incredibly expensive contest for both sides, and it just went on and on and on. And it really, I think, it sort of made clear that this is like that the World War I metaphors for this kind of for this conflict, how difficult it is to make any progress versus how relatively easy it is to just sit in the trench and destroy whatever progress the other side is going to make. Like that that shape, I think, became very clear during that time. Mm-hmm. We've been seeing that shape more with the recent Ukrainian offensive, where both sides are just so fortified that it's so hard to make any progress. Anyway, there's more, but I see you wanting to say something.
Well, there's a couple of things that happen as a result of the counteroffensive not really being a thing. And the biggest, scariest one, which is post this April-May turning point cluster, is the F-16 thing, right? Because the F-16s that are going to Ukraine are from Belgium and Denmark, and those ones can carry nuclear weapons. So that's what's actually telegraphing underneath it. And then days later, Putin's like, yeah, we will totally, if we need to, use these things. So that's what I thought the fundamental change was. But what it's turned out to be, it is those things. But as we can plainly see downstream from it, it's a bunch of other stuff as well, which is the dissatisfaction with how this is going inside Russia is only exceeded inside Ukraine. Like, neither of those people, no one in either of those fucking countries wants this to happen anymore, right?
Yeah, so I have to jump in because I don't think I said this with you, but I think I said this maybe a month later and then the next month on the Astrology podcast. But I was looking at where we are right now, which is Venus getting ready to do a retrograde and doing that with Mars. And that is like the same but opposite configuration as the one the war started under. The way the Russo-Ukrainian war started was Venus stationing direct with Mars. This is a Venus getting ready to station retrograde with Mars. And I looked at that and I was like, oh, that's got to be some sort of bookend. Like, not necessarily the end, but like that's the beginning, but opposite. Like this right now in the next couple of weeks, like until Mars leaves Leo. Like, it looks too much like the start to not be an incredibly important pivot. And what you're talking about with the lack of morale, right, distributed among many parties, that's the Venus retrograde. Like, Venus retrograde, like Venus, people I would say get excited and confused when they think about Venus in warfare. because Venus isn't warfare in the same sense Mars is, but but Venus is that coherent, or excuse me, the cohering, the socially cohering, motivating power that makes warfare possible. If people don't, you have to get, as we say, you have to do a lot of convincing, and people have to be pretty certain and actually care in order to risk their lives, while also doing generally repellent things to other human beings. Like you need aesthetics, you need ideals, you need like lots of Venus stuff. You need people to feel connected with people on their side and to have a specific relationship with the people on the other side. There's all this Venus stuff that is necessary. And so just as the beginning of the Russo-Ukrainian war had Venus stationing direct, like newly purified from a retrograde cycle, and like also rising in the east, and the morning rising Venus is almost universally considered more warlike and aggressive. But it was like the newly risen Venus, morning star Venus, like ready to motivate, right? And what most people would report was that they were surprised at the morale of Ukrainian forces. They were surprised that there was so much like coherent, motivating motive, et cetera, right? And now we're at the opposite state. We're approaching the opposite station, which is Venus is in the west and very tired and about to seek the underworld, right? About to become invisible for roughly a month, before emerging again in the east. But that won't be until basically September. And so this is also a personal thing with Venus retrogrades. There's often a like, this doesn't feel good anymore. Like, I'm not sure I care. Like, what does Marie Kondo say? Like, does this spark joy? And again, this is Venus, like ready. This is Inanna about to descend into the underworld to attend her sister's husband's funeral. Right? It's like a joyless going into the bad feelings rather than trying to keep the good feelings alive.
Yeah, we'll have more to say about that coming up in
Yeah.
the episode. But this, like, one of the things I noticed over the last 24 hours is basically how dumb both sides of the commentariat are when it comes to this, because it was either a coup, which it isn't, or like fucking Putin's playing 5D chess, which it also isn't, right? This has set the clock ticking for him one way or the other.
Yeah.
Because this is not a coup. People don't understand. Russia runs on warlords. This is warlordism. But that means he's got backing at an oligarch level. This was always going to happen. This is part of the story of what happens to Russia.
Well, and
now.
this is the Saturn Neptune thing. Again, like you always get like a significant pivot within the regime, or the regime changes. And for the last four of them, which reach back into the second half of the 19th century, it's either a full regime change, or a leader is assassinated, or in the case of Stalin, a really powerful leader dies, and then the nation gets taken a different direction. I was assuming there wouldn't be a total regime change like the fall of the Soviet Union, which gives us either the death of Stalin or the assassination of Alexander II. As precedents. I thought it would be something that looked like one of those two. And so here's the thing about the Saturn Neptune. This time, usually we've got 2.5 years where that's true, where the Saturn and Neptune are co-present. This time, because Saturn and Neptune will move together in almost perfect synchrony between Pisces and Aries, we actually get a 5-year window rather than a 2.5-year window this go around. And so, from an astrological point of view, pretty confident that we are going to get something like that for Russia, because apparently we always do. But there's a 5-year window. And so I don't know, I've just been looking at it and wondering like when we get whatever that big change is for Russia, and the coup or whatever it is. I mean, this is like 12 hours in. The Prigozhin's actions just like you were saying, it tells me that like, oh, it's probably not going to be 5 years. It might take another 2 years, but it's like, okay, if you're looking for cracks, like the fact that anyone would try that speaks to the status of the regime.
Correct. Now, he wouldn't have made that, because people, if they don't know, like before he started his mercenary army, he was already an oligarch. Like he's a background in already making money. So he's already part of that set. The job of running Russia has always been making sure the majority of the oligarchs don't want to kill you. And over the course of the last year, the pH at the oligarch levels changed. And the indication for that is this, right? Like there are enough people, presumably oligarchs outside of Russia, but that doesn't really keep them particularly safe. There's enough people at the level that actually runs Russia, which is these crime bosses, basically. Not that we don't have them, but they do. The pH has changed, and it doesn't mean this is happening now, but this has set the clock ticking, right? And I'm sure literal heads will roll as a result, but you don't make this is an indication that it's coming sometime. I would say next year. It seems like a good bet, but as you say, we've got 5 years to do it. And
if you would have asked me last month, I probably would have said that we've got until Saturn and Neptune move into Aries, because it's more direct, it's more warlike, it's just more, it's more action oriented. And then also, when I was looking at what is maybe Putin's chart, right? Because it's like we don't have a birth certificate. Like he grew up in intelligence services, right? Like there are lots of good reasons to, to conceal your birth data. But being skeptical like that, unless it's literally a different year, which is possible, but if it's anywhere around the maybe chart, he has a Saturn Neptune conjunction, which is like the Russian history conjunction. Of course he has that, right? He's born basically right as Stalin is dying. That Saturn Neptune marked Stalin's death, and it marked Putin's birth. And so what's interesting is that when Saturn and Neptune go into Aries, which is basically 2025 through 7, we have the same thing, Saturn and Neptune together, but in the sign opposite the one where Putin was born, if that's a close enough chart. And I was like, oh, that looks like the end of the reign. But who knows?
Yeah, as you say, if that is his chart, he could also be 105 years old and born in Korea, for all we know. But I agree. This is something, and even without astrology, you look at that and go, this is how the universe works. There's a fate component to this. If you assume the mantle of, in the same way French kings did, like I am the state. If you assume that mantle, this is how these stories end.
Right. Well, you're subject to whatever the timing is, right, for that nation. There's for the United States, we have the Uranus and Gemini is the really important thing. It's so obvious that it was discovered without knowing that it was connected to Uranus, and that's the whole fourth turning thing. That's literally just every time Uranus goes back into Gemini. And my colleague Nick Dagan-Best wrote a little book about that maybe 10 years ago, and shows the charts of the people who played major roles in those turnings. And almost everybody has stuff right on wherever, has things that get transited by Uranus and Gemini. I would say that history recruits people who are qualified to play the various roles. And then on that note, it's interesting that even if that Putin birthday is completely fake, they at least picked a fake one that has the Russian historical like conjunction in it, right? It's even if it's fake, it's like, yep, Saturn Neptune, there it is.
Yeah,
and it's the sun with Saturn and Neptune in the maybe chart for Putin.
Okay. So back to the last 6 months before we move forward. I don't know if this is just an Australian term, and it's almost a bit out of date from a gender perspective, but man of the match is something I grew up hearing in the 80s. Which transit was man of the match?
I think so the one that got the most attention was the Pluto into Aquarius preview, right? Which was that timed exactly. Everybody's freaking out about AI all the time, nonstop for, about a month and a half, 2 months.
And that's funny you mentioned that, because I want to get to it now, and we'll jump back a slide then. I want to talk about Pluto and Aquarius. I'm going to be doing a solo show about it in a couple of weeks. And actually the dip back into Pluto Cap has been the reprieve and perspective that at least I need to frame what I think it's about. But I
Hmm.
have the sensation that we're getting this not little move, it's a big move in many respects, but we're trying to get this transit to do too much heavy lifting at the moment. We're trying to get it to explain too much. What do you think?
Yeah. So a couple things. So part of the reason why it's worth thinking about and obsessing about, even though this was just a little couple, 2 month ish preview, is that it's a preview of like a 20-year thing.
Yeah.
And so, it's in a sense, whenever we're looking at a new Pluto ingress, we're looking, we have to be thinking about the future because it's decades of time, right?
Yeah.
Now, part of the problem with that, and this is this is Pluto's game, is to present a void, and then to entice people to project everything into it, their hopes and fears.
Oh, okay.
And
That explained it for me. Thank you.
yeah, oh
Carry on.
yeah, and so in with Pluto and Aquarius, the void, Aquarius is very future looking, right? So if Aquarius and Capricorn are Saturn's two signs, and they're the two. Saturn's places give us timelines and like thinking about the way time works, and Capricorn is more past oriented, and then Aquarius is more projecting into the future. Both of them are thinking about time, right?
Yeah.
But you have this movement of Pluto into let's think about the future, but in Pluto's way, right? Which is like basically a big projectable void with just a few little sprinkles of maybe this, just enough to like get people super worked up and completely populate 5 timelines worth of stuff. And
Yeah.
so,
Okay, that works for me. Yeah. So we'll come to it in a second because you vaguely mentioned it. I'm just going to change the wording. I'll come to it in a second, which is I want to talk about the Pluto Aquarius stuff in the context of the, not necessarily looming, but in the context of Uranus, Taurus, Uranus, Gemini. Because as you say, we're talking about longer time periods. That will all make sense in a minute. But for now, sitting with, okay, so we went back into Pluto and Capricorn. The thing that I've been looking at is that the bond is the Capricornish financial or the asset class par excellence, right? Because it's how a state funds itself by borrowing money from establishment wealth.
okay,
You can't get better, right?
right.
And we had a debt crisis coming back into Pluto and Capricorn. Why that's important is the solve for the debt we're in, and literally coming off as of about 2016, a 5,000-year low, not a 100-year low, a 5,000-year low in interest rates. And now that we're seeing that come off that bottom, it's tearing through real assets. This is where we come back to Uranus and Taurus for its last couple of years, right? But it's tearing through real assets. People are losing their houses and so on. But you saw Janet Yellen and the rest of it basically say, well, we could do a couple of things. We could, which is the plan anyway, like cancel the debt and roll out a CBDC. Now that's Pluto and Aquarius business. But we dipped back. We had that little soupçon of Pluto and Aquarius. And then we dipped back into Pluto in bond market, let's say. And
Well, and just to attest to that, the Pluto's ingress into Capricorn was 2008,
this
right?
is where
And
I
so,
started.
like, Pluto and Capricorn has been very financial, literally
Yeah.
from the first day.
And the corruption that began it, because that's a very Plutonian energy, which is, oh, well, let's just bail out all the banks and send no one to prison. The inevitable result of that is the thing that ends the Pluto and Capricorn era, right? Because there's, particularly for Europe, there's just no coming off. You can't come off negative interest rates and expect the party to continue. But just in general, that's where my head went with like, oh, cool, this is about bonds. Like I was sitting with what is the remaining piece of work that Pluto needs to do in Capricorn? And it's just to emphasize that there is no stopping the CBDC thing because it's transit through Capricorn, after the bond market to begin with. And that's that real Capricornian energy of a bond, right? Gentlemen prefer bonds, famously. Like it's literally the establishment asset of choice. People think that's gold. That's not. That's more a religious thing. The bond is the Capricornian asset. So
Well, yeah,
I'm
that's
glad you told me about the Pluto and Pluto being a void that you project into, because we've had a couple of, I mean, we've talked about them on the show. We've had a couple of really interesting long-term changes since we've been doing these half-yearly shows, right? Like the triplicity change and so on. And we've spoken at length about Uranus transits and all the rest of it. But it just struck me, like, why is everyone projecting everything that's happening in the world onto Pluto and Aquarius? So thank you for answering that for me, Spaceman.
yeah,
Richard,
you're
it's
welcome.
actually a component of Pluto. Like, no, it's like a terrifying void mirror of all your fears. And I'm like, thank you. That's what I.
Yeah, and where that black mirror is changes, right?
Yeah.
I think last time we talked, I did a really brief tour about of Pluto through the last couple signs, and where the kind of murder and terror that people were obsessed with. Pluto in Scorpio was the individual sex murderer, right? Like it was like Dahmer and Ramirez, and that figure in the 80s and early 90s was so focal. Like that's what a murderer is. Like that's who's out to get you. That's who you need to watch out for. And then Pluto moved into Sagittarius in 97, was there 97 to about 2008. And then that was 97 was the year that Columbine happened. And set off, established a pattern of school shootings. We had Pluto in Sag opposite Saturn and Gemini was the Twin Towers, but it was Sagittarius is the armed radical, even if they're like a radical nihilist. But it was like, these people like going on a rampage, and with guns. Whereas like with Dahmer, with like all of the sex murderers of Pluto and Scorpio in the 80s and early 90s, it wasn't like you weren't worried about them going on a rampage with a gun. They were going to get you, right?
Yeah.
And kidnap you. And then Pluto moved into Capricorn in 2008, and then the site of horror becomes, as appropriate to Capricorn, the system itself as well as history, right? We're like, where, which, you have you have discourses that were about sort of trying to figure out what was going on behind the curtains of power. Like that exploded during the Pluto and Capricorn years. That became much more interesting to everyone, right? And then you have just this like, the system, like the system is the murderer, right? It's not, the call's not coming from the inside the house. The call is from the house itself. And then with Pluto and Aquarius, right, we have this beginning of the future is the murderer, right? Or the future is the thing to be afraid of, or that we can project fear onto. And so in all those cases, there is some real justification, right? It's not that there weren't sex murderers during Pluto and Scorpio. It's not that there weren't school shootings. It's not that the system didn't kill people under Pluto and Capricorn. But it always pulls more attention, and to a distorting degree, than might be justified. The late astrologer Alan White used to say that one of Pluto's principal functions was to take a little thing and make a big fucking deal out of it, and to take a big thing and to make it tiny. That it does a switch in scale where it can massively inflate things and then hide massive things.
Okay, that definitely tracks with the Pluto Cap financial situation, and we may assume from what we can see this from where we are, some of the Pluto and Aquarius stuff. But I want to.
Sorry, let me just give a quick timeline. So rest of the year, Pluto and Cap. Early next year, Pluto back in Aquarius. It's basically there almost through the summer, or it's there for, I don't know, the first 8 months, then back into Cap, and then right around Christmas of 24, right on the cusp of 25, we get Pluto into Aquarius, and it'll stay there. And that's really significant because one, it's going to stick, and then two, in 25 we get Uranus, you would get Uranus and Neptune and Saturn all changing signs, and that
Yeah.
like that half, excuse me, that halftime show for the decade, which we've been talking about since I don't know 2019. That like that the Pluto's final, yeah, I'm going to be here, lines up with everybody else doing the same that year.
Thank you for mentioning it because I sort of skipped one of my slides, which was this one, the long range forecast, minimal change to long term prognosis, which is to say, this is all, I mean, and I don't want to undersell any of the fucking horrible shit that's going on in the world, but I just mean, we're talking about pieces. The fun thing about doing a 6 month show is that we can talk about uh, more sedate timelines. And I'm still, the 2025 stuff is still in play, right? It might not be, there might be different people running the countries and so on, but the 2025 stuff is still in play. But I'm glad you mentioned Uranus, right? Because particularly for the longer cycles, I am, there's medicine in being really precise. So for instance, we learnt with Pluto's little toe in, toe out situation with Aquarius, a very slow moving planet has occasional medicines that are short time frames, like the one we've got. But I'm a little bit more Mayan when it comes to the longer cycles that we can. There's more forgive in the blend. Like we can sense what a particular transit or is going to be about a little bit more because you're dealing with long, slower timelines, right? So I've been
Mm-hmm.
sitting with Uranus and Taurus. Well, Uranus not so much configuring to Neptune, but it's almost like you mentioned this earlier. It's on my Shruti box, right? If you set one tone going and then you set the second tone going and what they sound like together, because a lot of the takes on Pluto and Aquarius were about CBDCs, which are definitely happening. But there's when you look at these two together and their movements, I see something more interesting and something we can be tactical about, still be tactical about moving forward, which is Uranus and Taurus has honestly been fascinating. We've had fake meat. We've talked about it for years. We've talked
Yeah.
about the weird disruptions to the physical that have happened. But as we come to the
Well, and
end
I
of
would
it,
also add something that's very Uranus and Taurus that you've contributed to is at this point where we are a solid 5 years into Uranus and Taurus, the application of something of at least a vaguely animist framework to spiritual things has become ubiquitous. A lot
yes,
of people, whether they thought about it or not, they have changed their branding, and they're, everybody is at least pretending that they're a super animist, and that's so Uranus and Taurus, right? With
yeah, yeah,
Uranus,
yeah.
we have this like bringing to consciousness, like the sort of spiritual electrification, like Frankenstein being struck by lightning and becoming animate. We have this like infusion of energy and animation into whatever the sign substance is. And with Taurus, it's just the world. It's the stuff of the
Yes,
world. And so
yeah,
people have started en masse now, like if they're doing anything spiritual, relating to the world as if it had some sort of agency or aliveness or personhood, or pick your animist word. But that
no,
I mean,
absolutely.
we're 5 years in, and that it's everywhere.
Yes. Yay, frankly.
Yeah,
If
well
that's
done.
medicine we take out of the transit, that's good. Leaving aside I mentioned earlier the infrared sauna. I made the notes for these slides whilst in the sauna on my phone. So it's when it says commodity, if you're listening to this, it doesn't matter. In fact, if you're listening to this, there are no typos on this slide whatsoever, and I don't know what I'm talking about. But for the people watching it, there's a couple of typos on the slide. So I want to talk about it from the perspective of the arrival of things like digital currencies, because whilst we still have Uranus in Taurus, there's actually going to be some ham-fisted implementations of things like this, and it's because we do have that return, I think, of Pluto and Aquarius. So it's funny to me, not funny, haha, but the Pluto dips into Aquarius for enough time to have the World Health Organization ratify those IHR rules, where we end up getting, because no one's opted out of it, digital passports and the rest of this, frankly, quite terrifying Pluto and Aquarius style digital control grid. And it's kind of like, However, as I've been saying all along, that's not the end of this story. We do get them trying it. There's a bit more going on in those longer cycles. But the rise in interest rates is a big blast in real assets because you've got things like BlackRock hoovering up all the single family homes because people can't afford them. So you have this explosion in the last moments of Uranus and Taurus, which we would expect in real assets. Gold's having a great year, so's farmland, and so on. And it's interesting because the quote unquote cause of that is Pluto business. So it's like we couldn't really see this when we were talking about it at the beginning of Uranus and Taurus, which leaves us, I think, when you get to the timing, and this is the good news for Uranus and Gemini, for the millennial cyberpunk aficionados of us, amongst us. By the time we get Uranus and Gemini, we will have had a bunch of like really dumb implementations of this digital claptrap, which seems to be, as far as I can tell, that Uranus and Gemini opens up a bit more of a Fifth Element world of fake IDs and multiple.
It's definitely much more like proper looking cyberpunk. So when Uranus goes into Gemini, the first part of that is it's going to be Pluto and Aquarius, and Uranus is going to make a perfect trine to Pluto, right? So perfect 120-degree angle, like nice, smooth exchange of power. And so Pluto in Aquarius is already trying to do future stuff, and then Uranus loves future stuff in general. It's kind of, Uranus is in some ways flipped on its head, like its essential significations are kind of flipped on their head in Taurus, because it's a very unnatural place to do the Frankenstein lightning thing. And so we have a lot of like, oh, what's actually really radical and interesting are, 17th century practices that got abandoned as modernity, steamrolled things. Then I think, Uranus is going to go back to being future oriented in Gemini, and it's going to be configured with that Pluto in Gemini, or it's going to be Pluto in Aquarius, and they're both going to be there. They're both going to be in air signs, and at least in a sign-based trine with each other for 7 years, right? That's a lot of the like the rollout, or that's when things start looking significantly more cyberpunk. That's like the next level of that. It's worth noting, of course, that there's almost no cyberpunk story where any of the characters say, this is a great world. We're so glad that the world moved in this direction. Like, it was fun to imagine from the 80s, just like Game of Thrones is entertaining, but you don't necessarily want to be a character in it, right? Like, cyberpunk is not the delivery of a utopia. It's actually a very specific flavor of dystopia.
Yes. It's the many jokes about this was supposed to be a warning, you idiots. But you remember thinking like, wow, this would be a terrible world to live in, where you have to have government IDs to walk into a cafe. But anyway, I try to bring people the good news on that, which is the same people. If you look at your political class now, wherever you are in the world, because this is just where we are in the timeline, these are disappointing, incompetent grifters. And so yes, they're 100% going to try this stuff, but the good news is it's going to be shit. So if you can get in the right headspace, stay a bit frosty. Uranus in Gemini, I think, has more for the good guys, shall we say, than the bad. I think that's, I think Uranus in Gemini, I hope, as far as I can tell, is a bit more Corbin Dallas,
I think it's going to, I think we'll be looking at technology being less, as we say, like rolled out top down. I think there'll be a lot more horizontal movement, and from the bottom and from the top and to the side. Like once things, once things are in the world, then they get like played with and taken apart and repurposed, and it becomes part of the, ecosystem, for lack of a better term, rather than just like a tool that just a few people get to use to exert power in the environment. It's much more just like it's, so to use one thing really quickly about back to the things in Gemini and future and tech. So one of the things that Mars's 8-9 months in Gemini established was that all warfare needs drones for like 6 different roles. Everybody needs drone. Like just to play the game, you need drones. It's you have your artillery pieces and your soldiers and your tanks and and your air force, that you have all these things, and now drones are like part of that, like 6 different pieces that you need to fight any war whatsoever, right? That's just been established at this point. And that's not like a top down. It's not like drones were invented 8 months ago, but they clicked into their place in the world where everybody's using them on every side. And so I think like that kind of how should we say, like horizontal sort of distribution and implementation of technology is very Gemini, right? Where it gets used 100 different ways by 100 different people. It's not like we have the super weapon and nobody else does. Pluto and Aquarius is much more top down than Gemini. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's I like again. I'm just listening to what I want to hear, but in a good way. Like, yes, I feel like when I'm looking at the like longer term transits, particularly in the middle of the decade, I'm like, well, I'm feeling good about Uranus and Gemini. Let's do it, and not just exclusively good. Literally, I'm going with the Corbin Dallas vibe. That's what it feels like to me now. When we were talking and planning the show, one of the things, and I think this is the right time to do it because we're going to talk about the next 6 months, because the long range prognosis is broadly mostly similar to what we've been speaking about, I would say the last 18 months. Like we have been talking about the decade in general. And there's surprising no one, there's no big changes to what I certainly want to say about this decade or what have you. There are parts that are clarifying and firming up as we go through. But as you and I were chatting for this, there's some space where they're coming up that really invites going into the micro, which we'll talk about on the next slide, which is you've already mentioned, like the Venus retrograde. So we'll park that till the next slide. But let's talk about the next 6 months, because I'm very interested in using this window on the micro level to do a bunch of things, right? Like, so I had Dougal Hind on the show about a month or so ago, and he voiced the audiobook Hospicing Modernity by Vanessa Mercado de Oliveira, which is hilarious. I've been messaging him because she's an indigenous Brazilian woman and an academic. So Dougal, with his very English voice, I'm teasing him on WhatsApp saying, like, I didn't know your indigenous Brazilian grandmother was so transformative in your life. Anyway, this idea that Vanessa came up with of hospicing modernity, I think when we talk about desire work on the next slide, is important. It's what is yours to do as the world goes through some fairly big shifts. But
it's a great title.
It isn't it wonderful? It's absolutely wonderful. So we'll talk about that when we get to the Venus stuff, because I think the last big Venus retrograde working I did was the Venus retrograde in Scorpio, and that was excellent. So I'm quietly looking forward to, which I'll run by you in a moment, plans for mine. But what else have we got coming up in the next 6 months? Like other transits to look at, eclipses. Where do we need to, excluding Venus, what are we looking at between now and Xmas?
Yeah, so the the nodal axis, right, the head and tail of the dragon, which tells us where eclipses are going to be, that axis shifts out of Taurus and Scorpio, where it's been for the last 18 months, into Aries and Libra for shifts in July, and it'll be there for 18 months, and that locates eclipses for us. And but because we're still very early in that, our set of eclipses, which is end of October, it's basically like second half of October, are the 2 eclipses during the H2. One of those is in Taurus, which we've been getting eclipses in for, again, almost 2 years. And then the other one is in Libra, and we haven't had an eclipse in Libra for like 9-10 years. And so it's half into the new cycle. It's one step into the new cycle, but then finishing up the old cycle. And that's what we had. That's what we had in May as well, like April, May. We had a 1 foot into the new cycle, solar eclipse in Aries, and then one finishing up an old cycle, which was a lunar eclipse in Scorpio. And so we don't get fully into that new cycle of eclipses until next year. And so this is like a half in, half out yet again. But you do have the actual nodal axis moving, which is significant. And then, so it was the question was what else is going on besides
Yep.
Venus? Okay, and then the other, I would say the other big thing, both personally, but I would say even more so in terms of what's in the news and how these big stories are moving, is we get the Sun and Mars's conjunction in Scorpio at the, I believe it's 24 degrees of Scorpio, and that is, as we say, there are two, as we say, dramatic things in the Mars cycle. There's Mars opposite the Sun, which is as close to us as it gets. That's the heart of the retrograde. And then there's Mars conjunct the Sun, which means Mars on the far side of the Sun, which is as far away from us as Mars gets. And so the Mars conjunct the Sun, which happens later in the fall, is a reset. Mars becomes invisible, just like Venus becomes invisible when any planet becomes invisible when it's too close to the Sun. So you just don't see that planet rise. And Mars stays invisible for quite some time. You know, you've got basically over a month of not being able to see Mars in the fall, and that's a resetting of the the sort of symbolically, when a planet conjoins the Sun, it's being like purified, and all of the forms are being burnt away to reveal what the underlying like urge is, or the underlying motive or desire or question. Like for Mars, it's always like what's worth fighting for, and then how do we do that? And so we've got a important reset of the Mars cycle. And I was looking at that 24 degrees, and so one is that it's in Scorpio, it's in Mars's sign. So that's very, as we say, that's not, it should be very archetypal, right? Like what is where is ferocity required in my life, and what, and how do I find that, and conduct myself in that particular area. But I was looking, I was like, oh, 24 degrees Scorpio, I feel like I've seen that before. I feel like that connects to some charts. And yeah, it nails the Ukraine, Russian, and EU charts, like right on the nose. Russia has a Venus-Pluto conjunction at 22 degrees, 21, 22 Scorpio, so right on top of that, and that conjunction's really important for Russia. For Ukraine, it hits a ton of stuff. It hits the midheaven. It squares the moon. It squares Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter. And then for the EU, it's actually a super Mars return. The EU has Mars at 23 Scorpio, square Saturn at 23 Aquarius, and opposed the moon at 24 of Taurus. So it just like nails. All those charts have really heavy late fixed sign stuff. And so I was thinking before, before today, in the news out of Russia today, because that I was like, oh, after this, whatever this exhausting Venus retrograde thing is, where like morale is diminished, I wonder if, basically with that Mars Sun, like we could say it's an every 2 year war cycle being reset. It's like, I wonder if that'll be the end of the conflict, or if not the end, then the end of this version of it, and it taking a different form. Just because it just nails all three of the relevant charts.
So when is the time where it's mostly like shrinking that down? When are we talking where it's mostly hitting all three of them? So that's when it was 20.
Yeah, let me pull that up 1 second. I wrote down all these degrees, and I didn't actually write down the day it stations, or the day of the conjunction. There we go. Okay, yeah, so it's mid-November. So it looks like November 17th would be the day of the conjunction.
So one of the things, and this is going to be very interesting, and I mean, this is a ghastly thing to say, but it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. The back channeling from clients that Martin Armstrong writes about in his private blog is suggesting that, and I understand this is a real move for any kind of head of state, but the current US administration believes that it's more likely to win the next election with a beneficial or to them outcome of what's going on in Ukraine. And hearts and minds wise, it's not going on. It's a deeply unpopular situation in the US, just like it is in Ukraine and Russia. And so the risk is the use of nukes on either side earlier than his start for World War III, which is the 2025 start. So it'll be interesting to see with that kind of stuff going on. I still don't think, I hope to God that doesn't ever happen, but I hope to God that doesn't happen. But I guess if I was to gamble or blend the space weather with that idea, it could also be something like that, right? I don't know. That's just what
Yeah, I mean,
tabling. Yeah.
it's possible. Like what I was thinking was just, in war historically, basically both sides do round, like they do a round and then are like, will you agree to peace under these terms? And then they do another round to try to improve the position. Said, okay, well, will you agree to peace under these terms? And I'm curious. I guess looking at the space weather and now how things are going, I guess, I have a hard time believing that after this round is done, and this round will take most of this quarter probably, that there wouldn't be enough exhaustion on behalf of both fighters to call the fight. And who knows, maybe to be rekindled in some way at some time. But just that is the historical shape of war. And it seems like, because everybody got all their, they did all their Mars retrograde stuff and shipped all the materials and conscripted and drafted and had people sign up, and through all the, all this has been thrown, so much has been thrown by both sides. And again, it looks like, and I could certainly be wrong, but from what I've seen, and I've tried to hunt down good sources, it just looks like World War One, where it's so much harder to attack than it is to defend, and so you just get these built-up lines where it costs you so much to get 2 miles, and then with the morale dying. Anyway, that's just how I've been thinking about it.
With that, it is very World War One shaped, but the difference between World War One and now is, of course, nukes, right? So there is a
big difference.
There's unfortunately a solve. It's like we can either go down the exhaustion route and say, do you know what? Let's just fucking cool our jets for a while, or we can escalate. Now, from an analysis perspective, the people behind Putin are far more war hawky. So if this is the beginning of his end, and I don't think it happens. I mean, when I say if, it plainly is the beginning of his end. It's just a question of when that happens. That's not the good news people think it is. that ratchets it up. But I don't see that happening this year. So it doesn't time for November. And the other thing I was thinking about from a Mars conjunct Sun in Scorpio is like a burning off of spies. When you talk about purification, it's like a burning off of the corrupt, and even like in the sunlight is the best disinfectant sense. There's a whole bunch of people on both sides that are not playing this right. I don't think anyone's playing it right, but you know what I mean by that. Like, we have corruption like no one has ever seen in a global conflict. The Ukraine is the second most corrupt country in the world. Russia's run by oligarchs. You look at all the stuff that's coming out with the Biden family and so on. It's a fucking mess wherever you look, right? And so the disinfectant thrown at the spy section of a chart will be interesting. And I hope it's something like that instead, right? I hope November is an unveiling of the evidence skullduggery on every side in what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and also, when you have planets that are hidden by the sun and you're looking at like news stories and mundane events, it usually means, you can't see that planet. It's not gone. Right. It means that whatever that planet's doing is invisible for that time period. Yeah. But it's usually like really important things that are invisible. And it's also, it's worth noting that the sun conjoins Mars less than any other planet. Does Saturn once a year, Jupiter once a year, Uranus, Pluto, etc. Venus is once every year and a half, but Mars is the only planet that it takes the sun 2 years to reset the cycle. Okay. Which may not be intuitive because Mars is much faster than Jupiter, but it's because of the relative speeds of the sun and Mars. So we'll see. We'll see.
That is certainly true. All right, well, let's look at. We were talking about earlier, I'll just click onto the next slide. Venus retrograde in Leo. Now,
Scandalo.
when we were discussing it, how did you characterize this particular transit?
I don't know, Gordon. I say a lot of stuff about planets.
Does the picture
I'm going to
on the
use
slide-
I'm going to use the prompt here. So, just like we were talking about with Mars, when a planet conjoins the sun, right? You have this symbolic, or in some cases quite emotional, burning away of form, and the Venus retrograde, the heart of every Venus retrograde, is the conjunction with the sun. And so, like, not with, with Mars, we're looking at, war stuff, conflict stuff, struggle, whatever. But with Venus, we're looking at desire, right? We're looking at the beautiful and our definition and relationship to it. We're looking at like relationality, relationships. It's Venus is really Venus. Venus very much tells us Venus is the sphere in which we figure out what we really want and who we really want, and what kind of relationship we want and to whom and to what. And so we get a Venus retrograde every year and a half, and the part of the function of the Venus retrograde is to take all the things that we sort of take as sources of pleasure or harmony or whatever, all the things we quote unquote like, and then to turn that into a question, right? Do you really like this? Do you really like, let's see, what have I obtained a desire for in the last year and a half? Do I really like half brown rice, half yellow lentil pasta? I've eaten a fucking lot of it. Is this something I really want in my life? Do I really enjoy this? That's a silly example, but it's true. Like, what?
Wait, do you have that? Like, do you have that with butter? Like, how is that working? Let's just take a pause.
Either with fresh pesto, or with what is the sauce called? It's an arrabbiata with beef and pork. Right. Anyway, it's good. No, but the Venus, as we get closer to the Venus retrograde, we're already sort of beyond the event horizon, where like thoughts and feelings are starting to get sucked in that direction. The energy problematizes and turns into a question these things we take for granted. Like, oh, this is my friend, we do this together on Tuesdays, right? Or I like this television show, or I like, these are my sources of pleasure. And the Venus retrograde asks, like, well, do you really like those? And then it also brings up that which we have rejected aesthetically and relationally. And says, well, are you sure you don't like this? Are you sure you can't reconcile with that person? Are you sure you don't want this in your life? It's like the Mercury retrograde. The Venus retrograde is an underworld terrain, right? And the underworld is full of things that you didn't do, things that you didn't want. It's where they're rejected. All of that which couldn't find a place in the daylit layer of your life. It's where all those things are, right? It's like the ghosts of old lovers and loves never realized, like the thing that you didn't create, the painting you didn't paint, the story you didn't write, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's like an inversion of the normal relationship to desire, which once we get into it, people start feeling this. There's this tension between sort of I love this, I hate it, because even though in sort of waking life we often simplify like and don't like, in any relationship with someone you love, there are all these other feelings that are not love. With anything that you dislike, there are also complicated. There are complicating feelings, and so it's almost like with the Inanna Eresh Kagal story, which is literally a mythic description of this cycle. You have Inanna, whose experience is very separate, like being glorious in the world above, and then Eresh Kagal, who's forced to sort of mind the sewer of creation, like down to which all of the pain flows. beautiful, free, strong celestial Inanna has to confront Ereshkigal, who's been sitting there again with like the sewer system of pain for all of creation. And so you have this sort of this sort of reunification of the relational, emotional yin yang, right? The two sides of the heart, the love and the hate, the like disgust and desire. And that's really useful, right, for recentering, but it's also very uncomfortable, especially if you don't know that you're scheduled to do that.
Yeah.
If that just sort of starts happening, it can be it can be pretty disorienting.
And I think, like, leaning into it, that's what worked for me. The last decent, for me anyway, powerful Venus retrograde in Scorpio. So if people are listening to this, on the slide, I have a screen grab from a RuPaul lip sync that has lived rent-free in my head since it happened about a month ago. I think it was the best, stupidest thing I've ever fucking seen in my life, which is Jessica Wilde lip syncing to Kim Petras' Coconuts, which, by the way, Rue has put on YouTube. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, A, you're homophobic, and B, you can go to YouTube and find it and just marvel at, like, what am I watching? What am I watching? Now, for people who don't know this, which is probably not anyone listening or watching, Austin began his journey as an astrologer and moved into prominence on the strength of his lyrical, archetypal language. His dailies were and are famous. And when we were talking about Venus retrograde and what we're going to talk about on this show, how did you describe it?
Oh, the Venus Escandalo.
Venus Escandalo. And it was that landed in my head, which was 60% already filled with Jessica Wilde's lips. And so these two things have overlapped in my head as just the best thing you've ever said. Not the fancy books, not the moving and lyrical forecasts that get into people's deep archetypal transformations. Venus Escandalo in the same quarter as Jessica Wilde's, who's Puerto Rican, by the way. So this is, if you're unfamiliar with RuPaul, that's why that kind of works, because she's already in this brilliant red absurd outfit. And particularly for me, like Scorpio rising, where our Venus retrograde in Leo is public. It's amongst friends, right? And about friends. So it all landed in my head, and I have been obsessed with it since then, to the point that I almost wanted this screen grab of her and her ridiculous fake breasts to be on the thumbnail. But I'm like, no. I want it to be a reveal that this is what we're talking about. And I just think it's wonderful. And so thank you for making my quarter, even as it happens, even as what is going to be a rich process that isn't necessarily pleasant, which we've just got over. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to think about Jessica Wilde bouncing around to Kim Petras' Coconuts, going like, "It's fine. This will end soon, and I'll win $30,000." But we actually did move the conversation like into a fruitful area. after
this is. I mean, part of the reason I described it as Venus Escandalo was because the lead up to it is Venus and Mars in Leo, and I've been reading. Spending a lot of time with Hellenistic texts and their delineations this last several months. And whenever you have a Venus-Mars combination, Firmicus or Valens will just go on at length about all the varieties of sexual scandal that will produce. Also, this is in Leo. Like Leo is the sign of the sun. It's all about visibility dynamics, right? This is you get the stereotype about like Leos are so dramatic, right? It's when planets are operating through Leo, like they're very aware of what's seen and what's not seen and performing things so that they can be seen or understood. And so, Venus is always, the Venus retrograde always has these, these underworld dynamics and the inversion, blah, 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 blah. But in Leo, it should be much more visible. It should be much more performed.
Like large, hilarious, bouncy rubber breasts.
I would say
It's
that's the best possible, the best of all worlds manifestation. I think another
if you haven't
example
watched,
is there's a show that just came out called The Idol, with The Weeknd and Lily Rose Depp, who I believe is Johnny Depp's daughter, and it's just it's a show whose content is quite scandalous, and then people are scandalized by the show itself. There's lots of controversy about it, and it's literally about a pop star who is doing lots of scandalous things. And hanging out with scandalous people, and it's, I was like, oh, of course, this is like the lead up, right?
yeah, that's cool.
Like the show is about media scandals and the visibility of, for this pop star, and then people are literally like, the show itself is a scandal on social media. I would love to look at It'd be fun to look at the charts of some of the major people involved. It seems to be destroying the Weeknd's reputation. I certainly like him a lot less. Not that I liked him very much since I've seen it. He's kind of a uniquely uncharismatic person, at
I've
least as
never
an
understood
actor.
him other than you can close your. He kind of reminds me of not Michael Jackson, but the giant white guy that pretended to be Michael Jackson in The Simpsons. It's like, why do you look like that and sound like that? And why? What? Because I love Post Malone. It's like, what do you have on him that you have to end up in all of Post Malone's tracks? But I
Yeah,
agree.
I don't know. It's, but just as an example of like leading into it, like that's a very archetypally dead on example. But I think on a personal level, it's going to have a lot to do with what gets seen and what doesn't get seen, and the quote unquote like feeling seen is very important. But it's so also, of course, is knowing what to conceal, right? Like we have like we have parts which are differently photosensitive, right? There are certain parts of us that need sunlight or they will die, and there are other parts of us that if they get, if the spotlight is on them too often, then they die, right? Like we need both privacy and to be seen. In relationships and in relationship with the world. And so I think that's going to be one of the major themes of
which also,
the Venus in
yeah,
Leo for people.
I want to talk about that fire stuff, but I have one more thing to say, which just adds on to what you said there, bringing you back to the lip sync. Jessica won it within the first bar
10 seconds.
of the song. Yeah, because at the first, Kim Petras like my coconuts, she ripped open the top she was wearing to reveal these ridiculous fake, even for drag queens, right? Like it's drag breasts, right? It's comical because it's a man in a dress bouncing around with boobs, but it was this reveal of absurdity just
Mm-hmm.
on the beat. And even Rue, after whatever it is now, 40 years in drag, is looking at it with the same shock and laughter I was, of like, I can't believe this stupid thing I'm watching is the best thing I've ever seen. But it's, when you said Venus is Scandalo, obviously that exact moment, bam, was in my head, because it's what is revealed and what is hidden. It's the photosynthesis part just made stupid and extra and drag, because it is a real thing, right? Like we're actually going to talk about it in a serious sense. When you have Venus retrograde in an area of sunlit public visibility, it's there are times to sun your taint, and there are times when you shouldn't, and this is part of that journey, I suppose.
Yeah, and because because the nature of the Venus retrograde process is to throw things into question by presenting their opposite. Well, what if I stop talking so much about this? Right? What if I stopped needing attention, or, getting attention for this part of what I'm doing? What if I did the opposite, right? And then, well, I never talk about this. What if I got some attention for this, or this was sort of what I led with? And so sometimes the answer to those, after like the 2-3 month process is, oh no, I was doing it right before. You get a confirmation of a previous pattern, and sometimes you get you get meaningful change, but it's like, let's turn that into a question for a while and then see what happens. But that's confusing, and so sometimes people do things that are embarrassing, or that they wouldn't, that don't get built into the next year and a half pattern, right? And so, you know, what do I show, and like why do I show things, et cetera, et cetera. And so you tend to get, in my experience, you get much better results if you let that ambivalence just have its way with you during the Venus retrograde period, where you don't try to decide on it. You let those questions stay active. You let, you know, you keep cooking you cook the opposites together, like the repulsion and the and attraction and being seen and being hidden. Like you let all that cook the whole time, and you'll come out with great internal certainty as to what you want and how you want to do it. But you know, I think it's a quality of the mind that people want to escape from ambivalence, where, you know, being tugged in two different directions. And so they'll be like, oh, well, today, no, this is definitely the answer. I'll go in this direction. And then 3 days later, it's like, oh no, that was totally wrong. I'm going to go do this other thing. And you get relational, how to say, like things that you would not do again. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So much of this is just hitting the Scorpio risings out there. Like we're going to have some sort of fall over at a work function. Speaking of taints, and like, oh, I should not have worn this skirt.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, the Scorpio rising.
Maybe
Maybe I don't have to work so hard to be in control. Oh no, there was a reason I was doing that.
exactly. One of the things, this leads really nicely into that we were chatting about, unrelated but sort of related, was we were comparing fire ceremonies, and there was something you said about Vedic fire ceremonies and what burns off, and talk us through that, because I think that's really useful when we're talking about a Venus retrograde in Leo with the co-presence that it's got going on.
Oh yeah, okay. So it's probably not just Vedic, but
Sure.
that's a context I'm more familiar with. You know, a lot of when you're feeding the fire, right? You're feeding it ghee, or you're feeding it certain whatever ingredients are part of that ceremony or ritual. You know, the idea is that by feeding it to the fire, you're feeding it to the gods, right? And this is burnt offerings, right? This is the idea, and that in a sense, that's the only way to or that is the most efficient way to give something to that sort of divine level, right? It needs to be transmuted by the fire. And when we're looking at the process of, you know, Venus coming close to the sun and, you know, doing a fire ceremony, like burning off and feeding the forms of desire and like the shape of desire, thinking that what I want is someone shaped this way. It's like, no. That shape stands in for something that's behind what you were imagining relating to that shape would be, or, you know, somebody who has these qualities, right? Those are all the shapes, but there's a level of desire that is beneath that, right? That I would argue is more divine, and that doesn't
Yes.
get burned off. And it's that return to, why did I want a relationship that was shaped this way? What was it that I loved about, you know, let's like I was talking earlier about like the first season of True Detective. Was it because Woody Harrelson's face looks cool? It's like, no, there's something underneath and behind the forms. And so the Venus retrogrades tend to kind of destroy the forms or unmake the forms, so that you can get at what, you know, what is underneath or behind or before that. And again, cooperating with it tends to get much better results.
So that's what I've been thinking with what we were talking about before. And I might be misquoting you on this, but it is similar to the Andean system that I'm going to mention. But it was the things that burn off belong to the gods, and the things that remain turned out to be yours all along, right? And from a from an Andean fire ceremony perspective, the things you put in the fire, the things that get burned off, are actually impediments or incorrect forms that have trapped energy. And so by putting them in the fire, you release that energy so that it returns to you in flow. And this is a really powerful metaphor to go through a Venus retrograde in Leo with, right? Which is like, let the flames burn off that which wasn't even yours anyway, so that it reveals what is yours. And for the premium members who've been keeping up with the foundations, particularly in the last section of it, there's a lot of work around desire, which is also in the Wealth Magic course. And as far as my experience is concerned, a key component to actually unveiling desire is the burning off. It's not something you need to find because it's out there in the world. You have to burn off the things that are in its way. And as we move into, and this is where I think the medicine for this episode is for me, is with the long range forecast being what it is, which is to say, this decade's going to suck. If you live into the next one, you'll look back going like, whoo, glad we're out of that one.
Yeah, the grandkids will ask you about what it was like.
Yeah. So what I tell the members is we face some very, very unpleasant times, is you didn't come to Earth just for them. And you have to find what else you came to Earth to do. This is just the weather. And that doesn't mean everyone gets the boat. Most people, when they go through this process, realize, oh shit, I don't actually want to be a millionaire living on a super yacht, although billionaires are pretty much the only ones who can afford it now. The process of burning off the things in the way of your desire is how you reveal that, like, what you came to Earth to do. And I've got on the slide here, burn down your Groundhog Day. Like, the stuff that you do, the performances, like the public shape of these things that you do that no longer serve, put them in this fire. Put them in this fire so that you can see what comes next, right? This is the transit, thanks to you, that we're talking about this beforehand, that I want people to find the micro medicine in, right? Like, I want you to find the thing that the universe wants to express through you. This is a really good opportunity, if you haven't found it, to have it be revealed by the flames, because you're going to want that. You're going to want that to be your Venusian desire pull into the future as we move through some, again, deeply unpleasant times.
Yeah, and so I would add to that as a specific specific recommendation of practice. Picking something in your Venusian sphere to at least temporarily toss into the fire, like the principle of fasting, but applied to Venusian things. Thinking in terms of relational fasting. So, for example, if someone, is, as we say, hooking up with a lot of people and really unhappy with the results, like, do a sex fast. If I was talking with a person the other day, and they were like, I don't like how I keep relating to people in this way, so I'm not going to talk about certain things around people because I don't want to be the person who's always talking about that. On a very simple level, like, if we're thinking about dietary things and in the Venusian sphere, sugar and booze, right, which are like, the sugar and booze give you the, like, Venusian short-term pleasure spikes, right? But take that idea of, like, a fast or a temporary stricture or taboo, like, where you're not doing the shape of a Venus thing, right? Like, for example, like, so if so one of the things I like to do to obtain some pleasure at the end of the day is I like to play a video game when everything else is done, right? And so that is a form for obtaining Venusian pleasure, right? Relaxation and engagement, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be something that I could do a fast on because it's very much in the Venus world. But again, this could be in any area of life. It could be, like, in order to make myself feel good, I spend money on the internet or at a store or whatever, like doing a fast on that. Where, like, okay, for the 40 days that Venus is retrograde, not doing that. But, like, by not, the point of a fast for spiritual purposes is that with your body mind not being distracted by the food and the digestion process, that you have more attention left over for what's actually going on inside, right? And so this is a very specifically Venusian fast where you're taking away one of the forms, and then you become much more aware of, like, why was I seeking that? What is it in me that was seeking that? And what was I looking for? And are there better ways to seek what I was always seeking? Yeah. Does that make sense?
That's fantastic. And it's just reiterating why, and I'm seeing people talk about it in the chat, why I love a good Venus retrograde. They build character. They're one of my favorites, right? For all of these reasons. The invitation for transpersonal change or development or whatever is very compelling at those times. You do need to know it going in. Again, like that's the key to it. And that's very coming back to Inanna and Erich Kigal, right? Like if you just, oh, this is what's happening, let it happen, make a space for it in your life, lean into it, because otherwise you will fall down comically at the work event or whatever, going up to collect your award. But I think that what you just said, they're really, I don't want to say fun, they build character. Nothing like a good Venus retrograde.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the Venus in Scorpio from several years ago, and for that one, I had a practice that was inspired by a particular Roman subform of Venus, which was Venus Cloacina, which was Our Lady of the Sewers. And so, and this was a friend of, as that retrograde was like just building up, I talked to a friend of mine and he was like, dude, I've been recording sewer sounds. He's like a wacky experimental artist person. And I was like, okay, this is this. And he was like, dude, do you know about, Venus Cloacina? And he's like, yeah, like this whole, there's a whole mythology, like that was a Roman form, the great like sewer in Rome, the mouth of it had Venus Cloacina stuff. And so every Friday during that Venus retrograde, I would pour offerings and honey into the sewer and do a little prayer, because that one was extra. Being in Scorpio was extra underworldy. But yeah, so if you also want to do sewer offerings, that's that's on the table, or under the table, as it were.
So typically at this point at the end, I ask what's your favorite configuration that's coming up in the next 6 months? And you are allowed to say, for reasons we just discussed, Venus is Scandalo. But is there otherwise something else?
I'm not I'm not particularly terrified or delighted by anything. There's like a lot of like pretty good and pretty annoying. I don't know. I don't feel terribly polarized. I would say the Venus retrograde, the Venus Scandalo will be, very consuming and dramatic, if only internally. But I'm not really excited for that, but nor am I like horrified and and worried about the world. I would say I'm uncharacteristically kind of neutral about a lot of the next 6 months.
Cool, good place to be. And speaking of the next 6 months, what are you up to? What have you got going on?
Let's see, I'm doing all my normal things, like trying to finish 36 Faces.
36 scandalous faces. This is
indeed. I have a lot of the faces are redone. It's not just a quick edit. Like I'm doing real rewrites on everything. That's maybe like 65% done. I'm hoping to bang that out over the summer and just be done with a book I wrote 10 years ago. The level of frustration of being behind on something that you finished 10 years ago is pretty unique. But so that's what I'll be working on, teaching my classes. I will be doing another set of intakes where I'll open up some seats for year one students in September, and then again at the end of the year in December. If you're interested in that, go to the website and click on the notify me, like put me on the wait list, because I'm not announcing those publicly. I just did an intake, and it was done in an hour from just people on the list. So if you'd like to join the program, just go to the website and join the wait list. I have a bunch of not old, but over the last 5 years, I've given a lot of lectures and taught a bunch of classes that I'm just starting to make available, where you can just buy them, download them from the website. I've done one round of that. I have another couple rounds of that. I've apparently been giving a lot of talks when I looked at everything. So there's a bunch of stuff on the website, and there'll be more at any moment. I will continue to advise Sphere and Sundry There's an Asclepius series using the star Russell Hog as the sort of astromagic point for that. That's going to come out on Monday, the 26th of June. So that's going to be out any second on Sphere and Sundry. Very excited about that. I was able to, in the election, connect the Russell Hog star, which is the chief star in the constellation of Asclepius. I have the moon on that, but I was able to connect that to the first mansion. And that first mansion is explicitly medicinal, and then in Vedic it's the nakshatra, which is owned by a pair of handsome divine doctors named the Ashvinis. And so I was able to get the two stellar things that are explicitly medicinal into one moment and elections. That'll be out in 2 days. Excited about that. Sphere and Sundry also has recently opened up pre-orders for the Thema Mundi project, which is I think I referred to as the Manhattan Project for Sphere and Sundry, and totally is. It was basically reconstructing the Hellenistic chart for the creation of the universe. It's the universe's chart, which has all of the planets in their proper domiciles. And Kate and I got that over the last 5 years. All seven of those were acquired, and then Kate ritually combined them over 7 days last fall. And so that shit is nuclear. And the pre-orders are open for that. It'll be out sometime next couple months.
That's awesome. Really well done. That's very cool. What a project.
I've been experimenting with it. It's wild. It has, I've guinea pigged all this stuff and more. And it has, among other things, an immediately psychedelic effect, which is not any of the plants that are involved, but among other things.
No, well done. That's exciting. And Kate's in the chat, so everyone's giving her props in the chat too. So
yeah, it's a huge project.
Yeah, amazing. Awesome. Well, speaking of the chat, we will throw open for a few questions.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
And we'll see what we got. I'm actually going to message James. We can be casual now. Everyone can reveal their rubber breasts and bounce around. They can untuck. Here we are, Austin Untucked. Like, not literally, but yeah.
I mean, I believe that was one of your the potential names of this episode.
Correct.
Was it?
Correct.
Yeah, that was Austin Untucked, the Venus Escandalo.
That was it.
Well, I'm not tucked, so let's go.
That's true. So it is technically untucked. All right. But yeah, guys in the chat, how would retro Venus affect the retro Venus already in a native chart? No, that's cool. That's actually not a chart question. I like that.
Well, that's it's a lot of people's charts, right? So Venus is retrograde about 6 weeks out of every 1.5 years. So whatever that proportion is, those are the people who have Venus retrograde. And so it doesn't mean that you're not doing an underworld thing, right? It has all the same shape, but it just means that you were born in one of those phases. So you're probably much better at navigating that than the average bear. And so it's a phase match. It's like, oh no, this is what you do, right? You're like, oh, I know all about the ambivalent underworld of desire, right? Like it'll be a much more familiar place to you than your compatriots who will wander confused.
I like this question. What does the rest of the decade hold? This is almost a chart question now. It's just not a natal chart. Well, it is. But what does the rest of the decade hold for the Cascadian bioregion / independence movement? Takes on that, spaceman.
I mean, let's see. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think there will be. I don't know. I don't think there will be any successful secessions within the United States anytime soon. People might desire that. That might be increasingly appealing, but I guess I don't see that happening. But I mean, to a certain degree, we just got to see what this Uranus and Gemini means for the United States. It always means 100 really important things, right? Last time was World War II. Time before that was the Civil War. Time before that was the American Revolution, right? It's 7 out of every 84 years. And it just changes everything and sort of sets a course for the next 80 some years. And so, with America, we really need to, we can see all the tensions mounting. You can see you know, you can see all these like polarizations and tensions, in many ways just getting more defined and opposed and ready to do a something, but we need that Uranus and Gemini to figure out what the what the something is going to be.
I
And
like that.
then
I like that. I do think you guys get a divorce. I don't know what happens to the
I don't know
Cascadian
that.
region.
Yeah, I think there might be a mutual desire for a divorce, but I don't know that anyone is capable of conducting that legally. I
Oh,
don't,
I don't think they're capable of it. That's different. I think if we look at, because we spoke about this earlier, I
I would
think
say, yeah,
that
not a good time to be a kid in that house with the parents
you,
in that sort of relation.
so the funny thing is, and this is this will probably show up in a way in at least the geopolitics presentation for members, but otherwise the Pluto and Aquarius solar show. By the next decade, as far as I can tell, the the legal arrangement of states based on the Westphalian Agreement won't exist anyway. So it might just be the case that America gets there first. But I don't see how you guys, not that it's different for anywhere else really in the Five Eyes, but I think there are a lot of households on this street that are heading for divorce. I don't think it's I don't think it's just the US. I don't think we get out of this without a lot of broken homes. But I hope to be, well, when I say I hope to be wrong, if it happens in a way that, depending on where you are in the world, both sides are like, yeah, all right. There are good divorces, right? I mean, I know a bunch of my divorce friends are like, second best thing I ever did. Best thing was kids. Second best thing was divorcing the dad. And they're still friends and whatever. So it can be done if we extend the metaphor. But it's just, this is such a fucking zany decade, whatever happens.
Yeah, there's a little bit. Yeah, so astrology is really good at showing us like when things happen, and sometimes you can tell what's going to happen ahead of time. With this, I don't have a version of it that I'm confident of. I know,
Yeah.
the when is much easier than the what in this case.
Agreed. And I think the secret is in Corbin Dallas. I think it's in Uranus and Gemini. I think it's
Gordon, I don't know who Corbin Dallas is, or I need to be
the
reminded.
main character from Fifth Element, Bruce Willis's character.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. So I agree that that's just a Uranian nature of things, right? That you're not, if you, whatever, it's like part of that return and part of that transit by definition is that it's not going to look like what you think it looks like. So there's only so much we can say on this side of it. And I think we can kind of look at the when consequently.
Yeah, the closest I have to a shape for that period is what I would confidently call the second half of the decade, like the era of simultaneous crisis, where it's not one thing. It's like this is happening in Brazil, and this is happening in China, and this is happening in the U.S., and all of those intersecting to create whatever actually happens.
Agreed. I think that's, and however that looks will become clear as we get closer.
Or
Leland
will be super fucking confusing because it's kind of a storm that goes for years.
Yeah. All right. Are we going to outgrow government, Kyle? I like that. Well, I already have. So let government be something. The anarchist in me talking
Whether government thinks you've outgrown it is
correct.
maybe the real question.
This is the real medicine of anarchism, right? Like that. You don't have to have that on your heart. You can still be put in prison, but that's the. So to answer your question, Kyle, as a group, no. Humans are not going to outgrow government, but the anarchist invitation is always there.
And that's maybe a nice, I don't know, that's kind of a nice goal, right? Like on a personal level.
Yes, exactly. No gods, no masters, except I don't mind gods. Will the upcoming Chiron and Jupiter retrogrades signify anything huge in the world stage? I would like to know. Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you for that.
No, I mean Jupiter retrogrades in an extremely, so once you get past Mars, so Mercury, Venus, Mars retrogrades are disruptive. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, they all retrograde at almost exactly the same time every year. It moves 1 month for Jupiter. It moves about 2 weeks every year for Saturn, and then less as we get further out. When you're looking at the outer planets, their retrogrades are much more tidal. That is to say, an expected part of the environment rather than like the disruption of a Mars, Venus, or Mercury retrograde. So, Jupiter's retrograde for like 4 months every year, right? Saturn for 4 months and, a week and a half. And then Uranus for almost, 4.5, 5 months every year. Like they're just retrograde like they're retrograde so regularly and it's not a big deal.
Yeah, fair enough.
With Chiron's interesting. Chiron's not a planet, but it's, I believe, what is whatever the designation is. It's not an asteroid, but it's a thing that exists between the boundary or between the orbits of Saturn and Uranus, and also has an orbit, even though it's very small. Chiron being that far out also retrogrades very regularly every year, more regularly, in fact, than Saturn, because it has an orbital period of like almost 50 years. It's about 49 years. So really, really regular and slow. The only one thing I would say about Chiron in Aries. So Chiron shows like an area of a lack of integration, a woundedness, a disconnected, anxious sort of thing. And in Aries, ruled by Mars, like fiery, very masculine sign, I think I think it's pretty safe to connect this period of Chiron and Aries, which is several years now. We're several years into it. To the what YouTube would dub the crisis of masculinity, or what's going on with the boys.
Yeah, I like that. That's really cool. So a couple of them here. I'm wondering about this crazy weather of like actual weather. Well, we've started in El Nino. That's what it is down here. I don't know what's going on up there in the US. Is there actual weather in the space weather?
There probably is. I haven't focused on it. We've had some weird weather. We had a hailstorm yesterday. On the second day of summer,
Yeah,
which
wow.
is not usual. I know that we're getting we've been getting this all year. We've been getting like these weird like special deliveries from Alaska. We've been getting like weird Arctic dumps, which
Okay.
made our spring come way later than normal, and again gave us hail yesterday. But what I did see yesterday, Gordon, and I wanted to send you a picture of this, is there were storm clouds everywhere, and then there was a rainbow through storm clouds. It was really
Nice.
beautiful. And so there's like one tree that's like clear from everything else on the property, and a peacock went and roosted in that, and above were storm clouds with a rainbow haloing it. And I was like, this is a tarot card that I've never seen before. Like, this is
Yeah.
such a
So
weirdly dense symbolic moment.
my first thought was, this is a good, but I don't know what for AI return for like a give me a logo for a company, and it's a peacock in a tree with the storm clouds and the rainbow. And it's like, this is awesome, but what am I selling?
Yeah,
I can see it.
I was like, this is so portentous, right? But what does it portend?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
I was like,
Or
maybe it's
maybe,
like a weird Ten of Cups thing. I'm not sure.
God, I hope you find out. Like, because it's gonna be drag. Like, there's a fucking rainbow and a peacock. Whatever it is, it's gonna be.
That's true.
I got a good one here, Will, and there's quotation marks around this if you're listening to it. So thank you for getting this right. But like, will woke culture, quote unquote, disintegrate during the major transitions of the late 2020s? That's interesting. I have some thoughts, but you go.
I guess it depends on what you mean by woke. Like, I would say that woke is maybe a sort of unhealthy version of something that's been part of the American project the whole time. And so like that thread doesn't disintegrate, because
Yeah.
it's been here the whole time, and it's done a lot of good things. But I would say that this is like a weird parasitized, unhealthy version of it. I guess I would, in my mind, I would reframe the question as like, does that, whatever that thread or that piece of the American project, like get healthier again? Does it resume health, or does it return to a healthier state, or does it get sicker? I think the second half of the decade is so, how do I put this, like I don't think it'll be an actual civil war, but I do think that if we're thinking of that as a sort of a construct where the diametrically or like the deeply opposed portions of American culture have to fight it out, and then there will be a result that's not the previously polarized state. Nothing kind of survives that in exactly the form it went into it. So I guess that would be the answer. I don't think that part of American culture will look the same at the end of that process. I think it'll be changed significantly.
I think that's pretty good. I'm assuming by the speech marks that the references to, I guess, the corporate tyranny parading under inclusivity. Because if you look down generations, like if you look at the Zoomers, none of them, like no one's been, you know what I mean when I say no one's been racist for 50 years? Like plainly people are racist. But if you look at the Zoomers, no one's weirdly transphobic or homophobic or whatever. But by the same token, I don't think we need the military industrial complex to keep putting colors on a flag and flying it from machines that can turn whole countries to paste. And that that is, I assume, what is contained within the speech marks. As for whether that goes away, it's really toxic at the moment as part of the energy of that divorce that we're talking about. But I don't see, I think a version of that continues, right? Because Pluto in Aquarius is Jacinda Ardern rather than Jamie Dimon. So I don't know. I think it morphs. I think we get technology to morph it, but I do think there is a cultural exhaustion around the idea of submitting to pseudo inclusivity, which appears to be just going along with militarized capitalism rather than actually like not being a dick. And I think the exhaustion or frustration with that, yeah, we'll see. That's where I think we're at with. I'm letting these speech marks do a lot of heavy lifting. I've just read into exactly what I think when we're talking about. Stations of the outers are more ominous than their actual retrograde phases. Interesting take.
Yeah, the stations. So in Robert Schmidt's work in reconstructing Hellenistic texts, the term that he found that got used a lot for among other things, planet stations, right, where they pause and then change direction, is the term phasis, which he translated as an appearance that speaks, right, and that there was a special, like there was like that a planet would broadcast much more loudly or more specifically around its station. Right. So just to go back to the beginning, right, like Saturn's first station in Pisces was that like horrific death 2 miles below the ocean story, right? Like that is absolutely and because the planets don't speak, they speak through events, right? And so like that's very clearly the speech of Saturn in Pisces. What Saturn is trying to convey, right? We can argue about, but that's the statement.
Okay, that's cool. A couple of things there. Caitlin's saying that storm clouds are gathering around you as we speak. So if, Caitlin, you do happen to see, do any of the peacocks have names yet? Because if not, if that one rests in the tree again, please call it Stormcrow, i.e. like really gay Gandalf. That would be...
I could just call it really gay Gandalf.
That's true.
It is. I mean, it is a peacock. No, well, so they have names, but the people who love them and reared them, but who needed to get rid of them, told us that we were free to rename them. They're like, yeah, we call them this, that. And one of them's name is the Japanese word for fart. So I don't know that these were like spiritually carefully chosen names.
You made a friend for life. All right. If someone tells me that, you turn it around. Even like Stormcrow's pretty boss. So that's
Stormcrow's pretty. Yeah. I don't know. I would probably want to like translate that into, I don't know, some other language so it sounded even more imposing or arcane. But I like that as meaning.
Like really terrifying other kinds of birds. So it's like naming them bikies, but they're birds. So like Garuda's nice, sort of. Garuda's dramatic, but like name them after like really fucking intense birds, and you can have like a bikie gang of peacocks. All right. So this is a really interesting technical one. Austin mentioned the Saturn Neptune in Aries affecting Putin. Is the nodal shift to the Aries Libra axis, does that align with this too? Is Putin, in speech marks again, a Libra rising?
So again, if that maybe chart is, you know, within a few days, or maybe it actually is the day, I'm certainly not going to buy like picking the right. So what people imagine is the rising is Scorpio rising. Okay, right? It's it's Putin. But I'm not willing to like even pretend for a second that we know the rising. But it might be that day, even if it's, you know, within the week. There are a shitload of planets in Libra, and so I was actually discussing this privately with an astrologer a couple months ago, where it was like, he's like, oh well, the South Node's moving into Libra and going to be eclipsing all of Putin's stuff, and you know, you especially don't want to be eclipsed if you're a king or a queen. And you know, he was like, "Oh, do you think that'll take him out?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know. He's had all that stuff eclipsed since he's been in power a couple times, right? You get eclipses in the same signs roughly every nine and a half years, a full cycle of 18.6 years." And I was like, I don't know. He might be able to make it through that. I was like, I think he might be able to make it through that. And then the Saturn Neptune opposite is Saturn Neptune, which is, again, the like planetary fulcrum of Russian history. I was like, that'll definitely take him out. But we'll see. Like, I wouldn't imagine. I mean, okay. So with today's news, right? With the, you know, the eclipses love to dethrone and, you know, and rethrone. You know, like if you want to think about the, like, what are the eclipses and what do the nodes do to the political world? Watch House of the Dragon, right? Where the dragons aren't imaginary. But it's, you know, it's literally people jockeying for power with dragons. But shit, what was I saying? I got distracted by House of the Dragon. I was imagining dragons. Oh, but anyway, yeah. But anyway, we're just having this discussion. It's like, okay. So here's what I was going to say. So if we're looking at, but what do these eclipses on top of his Libra stuff look like? They might look like failed coup attempts.
True.
Right.
True,
Maybe
true.
that doesn't like, that's not the final nail in the coffin, or that's not the like the decisive dethroning, but it's moving in that direction. And it does show, you know, dragon, that there are other factions with dragons in that particular story.
Yeah. We need another word other than fail, don't we? Right. Because once you, not that this was, because again, but once things like this happen, there's not so much failed as in like each one knocks away some of that.
Yeah. It destabilizes.
Right. Exactly. Because the clock is ticking for old Vladimir, that's for sure. So Rebecca has what I think is a really good question to end on, which is, if you two could offer just one piece of advice for the next 6 months, what would it be?
I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be able to step far enough outside of myself to think about a universal thing. Like, I know I'm having very specific transits. So endure for me, endure and complete, or like if I can endure and complete, I will be very happy with myself. That's because Saturn has set up one of those. What is the like anarcho-capitalist utopia, the like weird like floating sea societies?
Seasteading? Yes, seasteading.
Saturn is set up as seastead on top of my chart, and so I just need to be able to carry that around and hear the cursing of of the ancient sea king. Anyway, I don't know.
All right, very good.
I'm obviously losing coherence.
Well, I'm going to go with the desire stuff. I would say don't waste the opportunity of the retrograde, because the clarification of desire on a longer timeline, you have a gap between now and when things get fucking hectic. to answer the question, which is very much on my mind and my heart, completing the foundations of what is mine to do, right? Like, what did I come here to Earth to do, and how, where do I intervene? What is mine to do? And that isn't solved at the level of the head, that's solved at the level of the heart. And the heart is, until you've done the work, just as much of an idiot as your head. So I would say, don't waste the opportunity of the retrograde to do the desire work. That is a longer journey, but be able to answer what is mine to do, what is the universe looking to express through me. Because it, funnily enough, the only thing I can think of, it might look like it's getting more difficult to have the universe expressed through you as we go through the rest of this decade. That's only if you don't know what it's trying to express through you. If you do, it's going to happen, because you came to Earth with this same seed as the fucking wars and all the rest of it that are going on. So it seems to me use this time to do that desire work, to answer what is mine to do. What did I come here for? Because otherwise you will get buffeted around by some pretty intense times.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. So that prompts in me maybe I can give an answer. I would just say focus on like what's actually important, right? Which may be the desire work, but like, you know, this is the age of air. There are constant storms raging, and there's always something to be buffeted by. Like, focus.
Yeah, that's really nice. And I think that's a wonderful place to end. And thank you, everyone, for a lively chat. And thank you, Austin, for your time and your input. And this came around super quick. So when I say I'll see you in 6 months, it's gonna feel like, oh, I'll see you next month. But once again, thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for participating. Really good chat. Really good times.